Hello, I'm Stuart Bowes, and this is the Net Hero podcast. Thank you so much for supporting us over the years. And if you've not come across our channel before, let me tell you what we do. The Net Hero podcast is part of FutureNetZero.com, a platform which believes that better business makes a better planet. We're all about people doing things that enable the planet to become more sustainable. That means reducing emissions, that means creating new things and products that we can all live and survive with, because at the end of the day, we can't hold back our development. We want a better planet, and I believe that business is the way for us to get that, by providing us products and services that have a lower carbon profile. And they're the kind of stories that we will be promoting on this channel. If you've seen and listened to our podcast before, you'll know that we've talked to scientists, academics, business people, but we're happy to talk to anyone who's trying to do their bit to make things different. And now, on to this week's episode. It's getting hot out there. Well, it's not really. It's freezing. But heat, it's that thing. People say, oh, it's the Cinderella service, a part of the energy mix. It's the thing we need the most, particularly when we have our harsh winters that we're probably expecting this year. And of course, it's one of the most basic parts of the whole equation of net zero. How do we decarbonize heat? Over the last decade, maybe more so, we've tried to decarbonize our power sector. We can see what's going on from electric vehicles, you can see wind turbines, you can see solar panels. But you've probably got a gas boiler at home or in your office right now. Very few heat pumps are out there. And when it comes to heat, it's been one of those things that, is it too difficult to do? It's never had that push, either from industry or, dare I say, from politicians. So how do we deal with it? Because it's going to be one of the biggest factors. And when I mean heat, it also means cooling in other countries. Look what's going on right now with the global rise in temperatures in other areas of the world. The heat is actually the cooling. That's still AC, that's still power. There's a lot to be done. That's what I'm going to discuss today with Professor David Glew from Leeds Beckett University, who actually works for the Leeds Sustainability Institute. David, hello, welcome.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
What is the Sustainability Institute? Can you explain it? Is it just a research part, and how long has it been going?
Yes, it's a research-only institute within the university. So in the School of the Built Environment, Engineering and Computing. And what we do is we're a research group specifically looking at three areas. So we've got three research topics on sustainability: sustainable behavior,
right,
choices we make, why we might buy a heat pump, for instance. And then our next research theme is sustainable buildings. So we do a lot of testing of buildings and energy efficiency that does stuff work. We go and actually apply our science out there in the real world. And then the final research theme is sustainable urban environments. So we've got sensors of networks of sensors, all across Leeds, where we're based. We can measure the urban heat island effect. We can look at the impact of kind of air pollution on commuter routes and stuff like that. So those are our three areas. And I think heat is very important certainly for all of those, certainly for buildings and the decisions that we're making.
When it comes to the work you do, obviously we're at this intersection with net zero, where science, politics, economics, they all go together. And a lot of people say, there's the science to do it and the reason to do it, and then there's the business case. Are you doing your research purely academically, or do you work, for example, with governments or corporate companies in the way that you do your research, looking for solutions that are for market?
Good questions. We're definitely applied scientists. So most of our research at the moment comes from answering government's questions. So they will set out a call and say things like, how do we retrofit solid walled homes safely and effectively? They will scope out their questions, and then we're able to respond to those. It actually also, because we're out there in the community doing tests on real world homes, not just sort of sat there.
Yeah, in a lab or creating,
Yeah, we can get out there, and it means that we're interacting with social landlords. So they are our case study. So they get their buildings sort of retrofitted as part of some of the projects that we do. We like to work with them and share the knowledge that we get, because they're the ones out there trying to deliver, net zero in homes or retrofits.
And do you work with businesses as well directly, or is that kind of still a
Yeah,
slight
yeah, for
way.
sure. So quite a different variety of businesses. So you can imagine, okay, manufacturers who are producing innovations, so
Right.
energy efficiency stuff, different types of insulation or products, heat pumps, that sort of thing, want to know how their products are performing in the real world. We can go
Okay.
and do that sort of thing, as well as finance providers wanting to understand how they can develop green products, green finance products that people might actually want to go and buy.
Yes, you've got that mix of kind of what is needed from the public driver of legislation, and then you've got the actual delivery and the costing, which I like. Let's just talk about what I said right at the beginning, and I did say tongue in cheek the whole thing, but it is one of those things. I've been in this industry covering stories on energy for 13 years. It's never really been a priority. Now, I don't know whether you think that's a fair statement, but I kind of seen loads on let's decarbonize power, let's get out there, big infrastructure, the rise of solar, as I said, the rise of offshore wind, nuclear, whatever, delivering those big things and helping us to decarbonize massively, without doubt. But have you seen, I don't know how long you've been in this sort of particular area of looking at heat, but have you always seen it as something that's not had as much attention?
Definitely. I think it's just hard. I mean, when you get down to it,
Yeah.
the easy wins, the low-hanging fruit, for sure. Of course, that's how we operate at all levels of government, business, and all that sort of stuff. So, we can perhaps get into why it's so blooming difficult, specifically to decarbonize heat. You look at climate change commissions projections on all the different sectors. For lots of reasons, they're all making great
Yeah.
progress, except for
Except for heat.
buildings
Yeah,
and heat.
buildings. Yeah.
Heating buildings is the thing that's just really been difficult to manage.
Is that because I don't know? I'm not going very philosophical on this, but it's kind of quite visceral, right? Like a barbecue. you know, Everyone loves to go around the fire of a barbecue. We've had heat as a flame since we first sort of got into caves and started doing things. There's a very different relationship with heat, and it precedes electricity, precedes everything. Do you think that's what it is? And we've built homes, particularly in this country, with fire as the main form of heating, through chimneys and all of that, and has slightly changed. But we still have gas coming in, still burning something. Most of us still like to cook on gas because of that. We have a real attraction to the flame. I don't know if that's kind of like loose kind of sort of geek talk, but there's something about that, I think.
Possibly, or I actually think it's invisible for people now.
How do you mean?
We just have heat. We have these boilers in cupboards. We don't actually look.
It's true, actually.
We don't have a physical connection anymore. Maybe if we did have more of a connection, we would care more. But our heating is just set up.
Yeah.
It just turns on.
Yeah.
We only notice it really when it boiler
broken.
breaks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the reasons, that's possibly one of the reasons why we are. Well, we've got a term for this called energy literacy. One of the things that we can really see in the research that we do is energy literacy levels are really quite low. For very good reasons. I mean, it's not really part of the national curriculum.
No.
So why would we? And the way in which we pay for our heat is so remote from our use of it. It's not like any other transaction we make. Go to a shop, you buy something, you physically get it there. Not only do we not do that with heat, every time we turn the radiator on, we don't pay anything. We don't even pay at the end of the month the amount that we used, because it's spread to kind of ease the burden on people's winter spend, because it's all ranked up on, very heavily weighted our usage in the winter months when, we'd be short of money. So I actually think the lack of connection, maybe we've lost something there. And that's possibly one of the reasons, the contributors to why it hasn't been part of the psyche. It's much more visible now, though. Gosh, we would be talking to people about what we do, and it would be a very quick conversation. They'd move on. Now, people are really interested.
You're saying you're more popular now, David? Is that what's happening?
I can walk into a room and people no longer abandon. No,
it's the heat, bloke. Run away.
Oh my goodness. It's turned the other way. Yeah, they won't let you go until you've told them whether or not to buy a heat pump.
We'll get onto that in a second. Let's just inform the viewers and listeners, as a percentage, how much of our carbon emissions are down to heat for the UK?
Okay, yeah, you put me on the spot. So buildings kind of, I think something around up to 40% is changing all the time. And it depends if,
I always had it down as sort of 35-40% was the ballpark. I don't know if that's still the case.
yeah, and it kind of depends on if you include embodied energy and what, because, there's all of that, and then power production itself. So there's the ways in which you slice the cake. But then the actual heat in buildings is obviously then a proportion of that. So that's less. I should really have these numbers at the top of my tongue, but I'm thinking that's the sort of numbers which you probably are likely to see floated around. The
Yeah.
complications again is, are you talking about carbon, or are you talking about primary energy, or are you talking about end use energy?
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because you can see transport, people say it's about 20%, and you can understand transport, it's diesel, it's petrol, all of that. But our heat it can be electrical, it can be gas, as I said, it can be coal, it can be oil, all of these things. And then there's a specific carbon element to each of those that's different as well, isn't there?
Yeah. And if you could really get into detail, it changes hour by hour based on
Yeah.
what the national grid's doing, for sure. So it's significant. What's really interesting for us, and I think potentially the focus of this chat, is the big chunk of heat. 85% of us, we use gas to heat our homes.
Yeah.
And that's a big challenge. We call that, well, one of the reasons it's a challenge is for this thing we call peak heat.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so peak heat, you've got certain demand when everyone, say February the 6th, 9 o'clock in the morning, 20 million boilers kick in.
Of course.
And that is a huge draw. Now, gas is kind of the reason we've kind of adapted this energy system is because gas can just sit there. We used to see it on the big gas kind of storage silo
the cylinders,
type
yeah,
things.
absolutely,
That
yeah.
there's just full of gas ready for that use in the morning and in the evening when we all kick on our boilers. Can't do that with electricity. Can't just have a massive store of electricity.
Exactly.
So this is the peak heat challenge. So the amount of heat you're using, the amount of energy you're using is one thing, and you can kind of overcome that.
And that's been the beauty of gas, hasn't it?
And yeah, well, exactly. You can just turn the tap
because it's been reactive, and which is why it grew.
Yeah, and it's allowed us to grow in a particular way dependent upon it. And so the amount of energy you use in a home, it's no good comparing that to the amount of renewable energy you can produce over a day. You need a certain amount at a certain time. And it's a big spike, So one of my favorite slides I'll show people when I'm giving a talk is I'll plot the UK's electricity consumption over a year. So from summer to summer, it just bumps up a little bit in the middle. It's really quite flat. And then, you click the slide, it's the big reveal, and you then plot the gas use in UK homes over the same time period. And it just looks like Mount Everest.
Yeah.
I'm from Yorkshire, so it's like Mount Everest compared to the Yorkshire Moors. And so it doesn't matter that we can produce a lot of renewable energy. We need to produce it at the time that we need it during that peak period.
And this is the crux of it, isn't it? Which is that the renewable energy or whatever we get or whatever form of electricity needs to be stored to be used. Gas, as you say, it's the reactive element.
Yeah.
The government is unsure, I think, and I don't think whoever gets in the next year is sure how to deal with this. I don't think industry is sure how to do this because it is the bridging fuel. Many people say it's still the bridging fuel. It's better than coal. Yeah, it's not as good as having green power, obviously, but it is the bridging fuel. But there are talks about, do we continue with gas because it is very easy to get out there. It is quite democratizing because it can go everywhere, whereas you can't stick a heat pump. Well, maybe you can convince me on a 14-story tower block in the middle of Dagenham. But the big thing is hydrogen the answer? Before we talk about retrofits and efficiency, which I want to cover, this thing about gas that you've mentioned, is that one of the things when you look at your research, can hydrogen play a role that we start to increase the level of hydrogen, particularly if we can get to the panacea, the holy land of green hydrogen, and start to use that so we still keep the systems, but they're not emitting as much carbon?
It's a good question, and it's a pertinent question. and for right or wrong, that there is a bit of a mini war going on between proponents of heat pumps and proponents of hydrogen, which isn't always helpful. So as an academic, it's nice to be able to.
I think you need both, in my view.
Yeah, well, I think in reality, that's something a bit closer to the truth. So the thing with hydrogen, if there's a thing, is on the face of it, it solves a lot of these issues around peak heat.
Yeah.
Just switch your source.
Switch your source.
Just start pumping out hydrogen. And there's not a lot of argument about that. Problem is, how do you make it?
Yes.
Where's your hydrogen coming from?
Yeah.
And, it's the same problem with heat pumps. You have to change everybody's appliances. Okay, but let's say that's surmountable, and you can do that because you'd have to change them over to heat pumps anyway. Yeah, where does it come from is the biggie. Now, it can come from carbon capture and storage. There's some questions about that. How much you can make, there's the peak issue again. Can you make enough to just sit there, and then when everyone's heating comes on at February in the morning, it'll be enough? It's unknown because of the amount of infrastructure that would be required to create that. And is carbon capture, which we call blue hydrogen, is that okay? And that's a debate in itself. The real kind of challenge is the green hydrogen, using electricity to produce it, which, wouldn't that be wonderful? Big old storage of green hydrogen that can just switch over your gas to your hydrogen would be wonderful, but it's going to take 3 times more electricity on the face of it to make the green hydrogen than it would be to just power the heat pumps. But then with the heat pumps, you've got the power of the peak heat problem.
Yes. It's a real conundrum, isn't it?
It really, really is. There's no easy answer, all combinations. When you've got finite resources, this is why people get a bit warring, because they're actually all probably deep down agree we need multiple solutions. But when there's only, £1 billion of research allowed, because that's all the money we've got, you want it all for yours, and what's going to be the greatest solution. Now, we have the luxury in academia of not having to choose. We just go and find out the strengths and weaknesses of all of the different solutions. But I have a lot of sympathy for both sides. In terms of suggesting whether or not the government know what they prefer, I think there's a realism around the fact that heat pumps can be rolled out without huge amounts of infrastructure to a point. And that point is the point at which peak, and the point at which peak heat suddenly then kicks in, and you can literally not provide the power.
I mean, we've spoken to National Gas, and we've spoken to people from the hydrogen, and we've spoken to people who are just pure. The future is electrical heat. My personal view is it is a mix. But on the point about one of the things that's always said, and I don't know whether you've looked at it on the social side of things, there is an element here of the retrofitting. If we go down the heat pump route, is expensive. Heat pumps have a cost, heat pumps have noise, all of those things. We'll park that for a second, but the pipe work is already there. And as you say, just switch the source. Do you look at it and think about the argument for gas being that it's quite a democratizing fuel because it's out there and it allows people of all abilities to use it, whereas heat pumps involve knocking down your wall, putting something in, sticking it, which A, not everyone can do, and B, has a cost. So the material cost, because what you're doing with a hydrogen or a cleaner gas, whatever we call it, some form of clean gas, is all you're doing is using the existing infrastructure. Do you buy that argument about that's kind of the reason that there is this dilly-dallying, because you can see there'll be social injustice?
So we're boiling it down to, I think it's worth boiling it down to, democratizing it is really just cost, right? I think so. If there's a world in which a heat pump costs exactly the same as a gas boiler and a unit of electricity costs exactly the same as a unit of gas, then there you go. You're technology agnostic.
Of course.
You're going to follow where the money can achieve. Can we get to that world? I don't know. Certainly heat pump installation costs can become incredibly cheaper than they currently are. There's a lot of reasons why that is the case, supply chain issues and installation issues and just supply and demand. Can electricity become cheaper than gas is a much more interesting question for of democracy. So the surcharge on top of our electricity bill is 25%. So that goes to something called the energy company obligation. So energy companies take a cream off the top because they know that we need to help people in fuel poverty, and using gas and electricity is bad for the environment. So it's kind of a market externality that they're trying to fix there. So it's only 2.5% on top of gas, but it's 25% on top of electricity. It's changing. If they shouldn't, because electricity used to be the baddie, right? That was
Of course.
the coal days. So in an idealistic world, you might be, we'll just switch to whack it on gas now, and we'll kind of have much cheaper electricity. Of course, we've got the incumbent system of 85% of us use gas. A lot of them, if you suddenly increase the cost of gas relative to the price of electricity
Absolutely.
to encourage people to move and switch to a cleaner source, you're going to plunge millions of homes into fuel poverty. So that's the reality that politicians are going to face. And we all would face, and I don't think we would want that simple switch over to happen. So we probably talked around the houses just to simply say, isn't it hard? Isn't it? It comes back around to how hard it is.
Yeah, so I suppose it's a hybrid solution, isn't it? Really, you're going to have to do, and as you said right earlier on, you said the trouble is we've entered a world where it is quite warring, which doesn't help anyone. It's this technology or not. Let's move on to the other part of what you do, and I know that you've had funding from DESNZ. I do love that, Department for Energy Security Net Zero, and you've looked at retrofitting, and this is another one that's one of the big things. We had the government scheme about a year ago or so, more like that, about try and get your house insulated, oversubscribed, didn't work out, failed. So many different schemes have not worked in terms of that. You talk about ego, and there are people trying to give away insulation for housing. Energy companies can say, hey, you qualify because you're poor, and people don't want to do it. We have one of the worst housing stocks in terms of leakiness for energy in the whole of Europe. What are we doing wrong? Why is retrofit not working? Because if you build something and you can save that energy, then that really helps us all the way down the line, because we're not using as much. So the cost can be a bit high, but you're tolerating it because you're using less. Why have we not got retrofit right?
Yeah, I can talk all day on this. You've
got about 7 minutes.
That's fine. We can condense it. So let's think about that Mount Everest again.
Yeah.
So why do we need it? That'll slice our Mount Everest in half almost. So this peak heat challenge is actually why we need retrofit. People talk about, you got to insulate a home to make people warm and comfortable. Yes, you do. Insulate homes make people out of fuel poverty. Yes. It'll maybe make a heat pump work more efficiently. Yeah, maybe. But the real reason we need to insulate the nation is peak heat, because if we are going to electrify, we literally cannot do it until we reduce heat demand, until we slice that Mount Everest down. Okay, so it's there in the background as this kind of thing on our shoulder that has to happen as a nation. As an individual, we have a different hat on. And so, the big research project that we've done is looking at house by house, solid walled homes, what works and how can you make it less risky from a kind of physics point of view, from a moisture point of view, and how much it cost. And that's sort of the research project scope, if you like, which hopefully will be published in the next couple of months, so you can see that. How
many homes have you been trialing and looking at?
So the project we did about 41 retrofits, but we did them in only 14 homes. Right. Now, the reason we did that was one of the problems with applied science in homes on real projects is tons of stuff happens. So you might get new windows, you might get your loft insulated, you might do some draft proofing. Well, which bit made the most benefit?
Of course, yeah.
And so what we did it all separately.
Okay, so house one gets just the window, house B...
almost, yeah, but house one gets a journey. All the houses get a separate retrofit journey. So we try to mimic what's happened in a UK home over the last 30, 40 years. So first thing we would do is do the loft insulation. Because we've all done that. This this low-hanging fruit. What happened? Did it work? Was it effective? Okay. Next thing, draft proofing. How much benefit are you going to get from that individual measure? Next, windows. Next, ground floor insulation, and then the final one, solid wall insulation. So we kind of ramp it up. That gives us kind of a profile of how much benefit each of these different things are giving us, and allows us to explore what happens if you do these things in isolation.
Can you tell us the winner?
I think it's very obvious. I think a lot of science is about proving the obvious, but of course, solid wall insulation by far was the only thing which you know, if you were really serious about getting homes to an EPC of a C, whatever you know, I could talk about an hour on EPCs, but let's just assume that we know what they are.
Yeah.
Or if you wanted to get yourself to any of the kind of heat loss per meter squared standards that lots of places have, lots of policies have. If you want to reduce internal surface condensation risks in homes, solid wall insulation is the most important thing to do to help people in fuel poverty. The problem is it's most expensive.
Of course.
Most difficult.
I mean, are you talking about injecting foam? Are you putting, there's the new stuff, the external cladding that goes on, which is,
so
and there's
solid
internal,
walls,
there's so many different types.
So yeah, wall insulation bit. I mean, partly that's, and also the shape of your home obviously makes a big difference. So if you're a flat that you don't have much external area, then of course it's not going to be beneficial for you. And we call that the penguin effect, actually. You know, if you've got homes next door to you,
sit next to each other,
behind you, above you, by the sides of you, you're actually doing okay. If you were one of those homes that's in the middle, you might be in a whole EPC band better than the home on the end.
Of course, because they're exposed to the weather.
They've got more heat loss. They've got a bigger area. Yeah, so there's three types of walls. Wall insulation, cavity walls, which we didn't look at in this project because it's kind of a little bit more done. It's just cheaper, simpler, quicker, and it's one of those low-hanging fruit. You know, there are still homes that haven't had it done, but mostly that's kind of been covered by other research and other policies. Solid walls are the biggie because they're the ones that you're more likely, if people in fuel poverty are more likely to live in solid walls. Solid walled homes tend to be a bit older. Solid walled homes have more moisture problems.
They need to breathe as well, obviously.
Well, the problem is they were built to breathe, and then we messed around with them, and so we get these interactions of old and new.
We do, yes.
New technology on, so we get gypsum non-breathable plaster to repair walls that were used previously had lime plaster on. So you they've been messed around with. Is the simplest way to say it. And so that was the focus. Now you can put insulation in the inside or on the outside of a solid walled home. And people always ask, what's the best? Which one should we do?
Yes.
Which is the most effective? So there isn't really an answer. From the physics point of view, it's the same because it's the same amount of thermal. It's the same amount of thermal resistance, in theory, in a steady state world. It's not a real world though. In the real world, we make mistakes. There are complications and there are certain issues that we need to consider. So the simplest and the one that you can roll out with fewer unintended consequences, and you can kind of go to whatever thermal performance you want. You can make this insulation almost as thick as you want. Is external.
And I thought that would be the answer. Yeah, absolutely.
However, that's not an option. Lots of homes are never going to be able to have external wall insulation, all these beautiful architecture we have in the UK.
You just say to anyone in grade 2 listed home, you're going to have to
even just a nice village. They're not going to want it, let alone
conservation areas, all of that.
So internal is a real option. It's higher risk if done without due care and attention. Now, building regs is agnostic to whether you put it on the outside or the inside, but risk profiles are not. They very much care. So if you're insulating your home and you put it on the inside, that means that you've made the bricks cold. If you think about it, your radiators are inside, your heating's inside. You warm up your bricks from inside to outside, not from outside to inside, apart from when it's sunny. As soon as you put the insulation, and if you put the insulation on the outside, you keep everything nice and warm. All your bricks are nice and warm. You put the insulation on the inside, which is what a lot of us would have to do. You've stopped your bricks from getting warm, or your stone, whatever it's made of. As soon as you start making the building fabric cold in certain areas, you're going to get moisture problems. And so this is a real issue. We've looked into this. We've explored what happens if you leave discontinuities in insulation. What happens if you go too thick with your insulation, is the interstitial condensation. So one of the outcomes, and to de-risk, this is one of the project's aims, was to try and de-risk retrofits that are going on in people's homes. Because goodness, we don't want that to be another barrier. We've got enough barriers for people doing it. So we want these to be nice and safe. So we're looking at things like internal wall insulation being thinner than external wall insulation, not because it doesn't work as well or because it doesn't need it, but just because if you want to be able to balance the risk versus the benefit. We reckon you could have almost none of the risk, but 80% of the benefit if you just went a little bit thinner. Building regs doesn't consider that. It's an education piece that we're going to have to do with building control officers, try and get government to buy into it, all that sort of stuff. So changes can happen. We can de-risk retrofits. We can make them more effective. It just takes time, but we're hoping that our research is going to move that journey on a bit.
Before we end, let's talk about your practical experience, as you just said there. What did the people who did the fitting find, and what did the people who owned the houses say to you? If you can give us an idea, did they notice the difference? Because that's the crux of this, right? I've always said net zero, 1.5 degrees, all of that. These are all things that we don't understand. We can't manifest in our brain. We can understand, as I covered on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, air pollution. You can smell it, right? We all remembered what happened during COVID when suddenly, oh my God, there are ducks and there's birds, and you can see all of that. You know when your house is cold. You know when you're feeling warm and temperatures and the thermostat's still down and not high. What did the people say who fitted it, and what did the people say who were in these houses that you tried it out on?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Because those tangibles, those non-financial benefits are the things that we need to be singing about, because there are so many of them. So installers often, really excited to try new stuff, but risk averse.
Of course.
And
I don't want to mess that up, mate.
Yeah, and I think there's a real tendency, as you can imagine, to stick to what you know. Well, we never used to do it like that, and that's fair, and that's because it's tried and tested, and so there's always going to be a bit of a challenge to
reticence. Should we say?
Yeah, well, any new innovations. Having said that, a lot of the tried and traditional approaches to stuff were the things that work, and so there's a bit of a two-way learning there. So new innovations need to. If you're designing a new innovation and you blame the installer for putting it in wrong, your design was wrong.
Correct.
You've created a product that can't be installed properly. So there's a bit of a two-way there. But generally encouraging people in the home, we find
the most important.
Really interesting. So we work a lot with social landlords. So we kind of sometimes have a little bit of a skewed market if you're looking at it like that. So we'll have homes that aren't heated at all. They have heating, but they're not used. So we're looking at that kind of level of fuel poverty where they're choosing to not heat their homes. And
which is actually the most important. If we can't take everyone with us, what's the point?
Exactly. And so it is a really powerful message on the broader principle of we should be helping these people, because we do observe huge improvements in living conditions post retrofits in some of these homes. But it's also good for motivating people who can do something about it to act. So one of the biggest motivators we think is going to happen, and we've seen it in anecdotal bits and pieces here and there, is when you insulate your home, you're going to actually make it less likely to overheat. And we don't like it being cold, but we can turn the heating on. We can put on more clothes.
No, you can't do much with it. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
When your house is hot, people hate it when their house is hot, and it's a real motivator. So there are more stable conditions. It's warmer in winter, it's cooler in summer. There's, hopefully you've got better ventilation. Part and parcel of any, there is this saying, no insulation without ventilation, take on the old slogan. But it's hugely important that you're improving the air quality in homes as well. We spend most of our times in homes. And so what I think what we've asked when we've talked to people about, would you buy these things who haven't experienced things like heat pumps but also insulation, their feedback is often, I need to see it. I need to see someone in the street who's already got it and go and experience it. And it's a little bit like the Teslas when they first came out. A marketing campaign was park your Tesla on your driveway. The first person that gets it is a weirdo. When 3 or 4 have got it, you want to be involved as well. And one of the problems we have is insulation is invisible. Heat pumps are visible, but perhaps that's not a good thing. But insulation is invisible, so it's really tricky to kind of get that generate some kind of activity around understanding. Well, that house has been insulated over there.
That's the thing, though. It's about the whole point of net zero. And is there anything on any of the websites the university has or the research sites that people can start to understand a bit more about what's going on with
sure. It's not going to be too heavy. There's going to be a summary report. Remember, it has to be read and understood by ministers. Say that.
There we go.
We're constantly putting effort in to make the messages clear, translatable, and accessible. So coming out in the next month, I hope, will be the demonstration for energy efficiency potential.
And that's on the Leeds. Is there a website for the Leeds Sustainability?
That's be linked to the Department for Energy website. So Department for Energy have already got several of our projects on their website. So if you typed it into a searcher engine, Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero, Leeds Beckett, then you will get taken to a page where there's a few things that we've reported. Or if you just typed in Leeds Sustainability Institute or Leeds Beckett University, navigate to our page. There's a list of our 3 research themes that we talked about in the beginning of the talk. And under each theme, you can check and click on all of our different research projects that we've undertaken over the last 20 odd years.
Brilliant. I think you're doing some great work. And I think also it is one of the topics that I've wanted to cover. I'm sure we'll come back to it again because it's one of the major ones. David, thanks so much for joining us on the Net Hero podcast. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
If you have been interested in what we've been talking about, let us know. Get in touch on social media. If you are facing a heat decarbonisation challenge for your business or organisation, then drop us a line. And if you want to be on the Net Hero podcast, get in touch. I'll see you very soon.
You've been listening to the Net Hero podcast with Sumit Bose from Future Net Zero. Visit our platform for all things net zero. And if you or your business is doing great things on the path to net zero and want to be featured on the podcast, email nethero@futurenetzero.com. Follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.